Fáilte go dtí an episód sa Ceist na Teangan. Podcrail faoi Ngaileán agus a star de aine atá fistrop faoi our gadrúh léithí agus a role in our bhéiniúlacht. Welcome to the Language Question, a podcast about the Irish language and its history for anyone curious about our relationship with it and its role in our identity. Maris Gnág, bí cinnte a chlárú ag thelanguagequestion.com/resources chun de acmhaní fálam to Sarah Nashka a all agus a bheith ar an eolas faoi gachcrud atá ar siúl ar an show. As usual, please be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to be sure to get your complimentary, valuable learning resources and to stay up to date, upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Peish Gaeilge, Shulling, go muire tú soltas. Anyhow, here goes. I hope you enjoy it. Briana Ní Loingsigh is an Irish-Polish-American creator, writer, and fáilmiúr learner. Through her work, she explores themes of heritage, identity, growth, embracing perfection, and finding peace on the other side of fear, often through the lens of language learning. She is the author of the very successful fáilmiúr publication on Substack. Briana a Cara, tá fáilte is fihirót ar an show agus am Harabh buíoch díot as a bhelin.
Gurmian like it, hey.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here with me, Briana. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to join us here today. And I was so excited when I heard back from you that you were available to do the call, because since I discovered you and your Substack, I've been absolutely intrigued by everything that you've been doing there. And I suppose for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of discovering that yet, what I'd love to do maybe to start with here is just to just learn a little bit more about you and your background and where you're coming from originally.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I was born and raised in New Jersey, and then I moved to New York City to go attend college 15 years ago, and I've been living here ever since. I'm in Brooklyn now. And growing up, I always was raised with an awareness of being more than American in a sense. I had a very strong Irish-American identity, so to speak. There's a lot of, visits home, as it was said, and, people visiting back here. And then on the other side, interestingly, my Irish side of the family felt much more culturally present, but my grandparents spoke Polish on my mom's side. But I didn't have much of a connection to the culture. So, I always felt this sort of connection to things that were beyond the life I was living, so to speak, and to places I at some points hadn't even been. And so that sort of led me to different ways of trying to explore those things. And I found the Irish language, and that really clicked for me as my way to really embrace that side of myself more.
I think your story in relation to the Irish language is truly exceptional. But before that, just from the little bit of research I've been able to do, I think you say yourself that you were quite interested in language before you started learning Irish. You would have been interested in languages in school and growing up. That would have been something that you were naturally kind of interested in?
So yes and no. I mean, I had an interest in it in the sense that I always thought it was interesting that people could do that. But my actual personal experience with learning languages was never one I would really call successful. I remember I was maybe about 7 or 8 years old when I started to have Spanish lessons in school. And I remember thinking oh, great, now I'm going to speak Spanish. And spoiler, I do not at all. So I had a similar experience to what I hear a lot of people have in different countries, different languages about, taking languages in school, where I didn't really come out of that experience with any real ability in the language, but I still had this sense that it would be a really interesting thing to be able to do. So I was interested in the idea of it. I just didn't necessarily believe that it was something I was capable of experiencing.
That's fascinating. And so before I come on to the Irish piece, which I'm sure many of our listeners are absolutely dying to dive into, but and let's say before coming to the Irish language piece, shall I say, can I tell what you mentioned your Irish language heritage and that being part of your background? Was Irish language kind of what element did that play any element in that kind of cultural or the heritage, that identity that you felt growing up? Would that have been part of the piece?
So again, it's interesting because yes and no again. That, no one in my family in Ireland, at least anyone I've connected with personally, has the language today. But I think it was something that did come up as like, oh, here's like a fun fact about where we're from almost. But there was this sort of, it was an easy gift or an easy way to impress me as an American child almost, that like, oh, here's something with something else written on it, And I think, again, I think to people it might not have been that deep even. It might have even been they didn't even realize sometimes that there was Irish written on something or whatever. But I always sort of latched onto that as, well, what is that? What is this other language? And even like one very kind of iconic thing in my memory growing up was a picture of my grandparents standing with the sign of the town that they were both from. And obviously the sign was bilingual. So it was never something that I necessarily like was sat down and told this exists, but it was sort of just these little traces of it that I think made me very curious as to like what that was. And I wanted to know more about it.
That's so interesting. And so then what's really intriguing me hearing you tell your story is, the inflection points and when and how they occurred. Because I mean, you've developed an extraordinary mastery of Irish from certainly what I can see in terms of your posts on Substack. And for anybody who doesn't know, Briana publishes her Substack is called Fáil Muir, which is the Irish for learner. And we'll put details and links to that in the show notes. But most importantly, Briana publishes in both Irish and in English on the Substack, and it's remarkable. I actually don't know anybody else that I'm aware of who's publishing as Gaeilge on Substack. So mahu agus cogard agus lat. And I noticed from your Substack you said that you started learning Irish in 2020, right? And just from our conversation, that's relatively recent. While you've made an extraordinary progress in that period of time, it is relatively recent in terms of your development and growing up and so on. So what was it in 2020 that caused that change?
Yeah, so I mean, it goes back to a year or so to 2019. I was in Ireland, and again, like sort of, I just sort of honed in on anything about the language that existed, even though no one really that I was with was paying much mind to it. And it sort of just really, it's funny because I know people say like, oh, you don't see much Irish in Ireland or things like that. But to me, it was almost the opposite, where I just was so like, I want to understand what everything is. Like, I don't want to just settle for half of it. Like, I want to know both sides of the sign, so to speak. And and so it just sort of made me aware too that I knew I was just seeing the surface of something, basically. I knew there was more than what I was aware of. And so that really made me want to know what more was in that sense. And so coming home from that, I did have a brief stint of like Duolingo and even Googling like how to learn a language. Like I was going to be more serious than just Duolingo, but I found myself pretty quickly like overwhelmed by that. And again, even just kind of a recurring theme for me too is having had an experience of feeling like I didn't know how to learn a language or couldn't learn a language even, that faced with, okay, there's this whole language out ahead of me, and what do I pick first was really daunting to me when I was trying to kind of self-study it. So I sort of just thought, okay, well, can't do that, give up. And then around the new year, I think especially kind of ironically, 2020, everyone was like, oh, it's going to be a new year, new decade, new everything. Everything's going to be different. It was, but
not in the way we were expecting, I don't think. Yeah.
So I think it would have happened any new year probably, because it had never left my mind after I had started, like.
For anybody who was on a different planet in 2020, we actually had COVID here then, right? Okay, so.
Yes. It had definitely been something I had an interest in kind of for quite a long time, but, it was never something I really thought too deeply about or really thought, I could do in any meaningful way. But after I gave it a slight attempt on my own, it really did kind of start that, well, what if I hadn't given up, and how good would I be now, and things like that. So then I did start taking lessons in the time, briefly, at Irish Arts Center in Manhattan, in New York. And and like when I started that, it was an 8-week course. And, I sort of just myself, okay, like really try for 8 weeks, like study, do everything you can do. And if after 8 weeks, you still think you can't learn a language, well, then you can't language, and then you tried, After I think about 6 or 7 weeks, it was ended because of COVID again. At the time, sort of, it was a good thing overall for the world, but for me and my Irish journey, at least, it did kind of work out. naturally that, I was working in theater at the time, and that my job also didn't really exist for the foreseeable future. And I really just had nothing to do but go all in on Irish. And again, partly motivated by consistently trying to convince myself, like, okay, this is working. I am seeing progress. I am doing this, so it's sort of multi factors at play, but it did work out.
It certainly did. That's such an inspirational story. And that's so cool because, I mean, oh God, COVID, I'm practically triggered talking about it. But
yeah.
I mean, but at the same time, I mean, turning that kind of thing, which was a very negative experience for many people, and we mustn't make light of the fact it was very negative for many people who didn't have the opportunity to do various different things, and it impacted them very, very negatively indeed. But to have been able to turn that very negative experience into such a positive kind of opportunity is extraordinary. And I want to dig into what that process looked like, because I think that would be very, very interesting for people. And I'd love to just get your reflections on that, looking back now, as to what you felt, worked and didn't, or you would have done differently doing it again. But before I come to that, I'm just reminded of when you're talking about coming back to Ireland. Have you seen that film? Is it You Ming is Annam Down? And he comes to Ireland to learn Irish, and nobody speaks any Irish, and it's so true. But how did you find? What was that like for you when you had this kind of, you were intrigued by the language? And I see just on the homepage of Fáill Muir, I think it's Baileyborough is the town. So it was maybe County Cavan. And so it's a kind of a part of the Gaeltacht, and Irish isn't widely spoken there. How did that, for somebody who had that kind of curiosity and interest, how did the absence of the language, or the inability to kind of, let's say, engage or use with it, how did that sit with you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because in a way, I think, and this is another sort of bigger side to this too, is that, growing up with a very much awareness of Ireland and Irish culture, and even knowing Irish people personally, I was also very aware of how I may be perceived as an American with Irish heritage, and so I always felt sort of like, I don't want to come off like a plastic patty or things like that. And so sort of because of that, like in a way, I almost didn't, I mean, I was aware that like where my family was from was not a Gaeltacht and things like that. Like I was aware of that, and I knew they didn't speak it, but it's also meant like I wasn't really interested in asking people questions in a way, because I knew enough to know that had its own weight and that had its own things to it. And I didn't want to come across like ignorant in the sense of like, oh yeah, well, everyone must speak this. So I think also that played an interesting role in it too, that through the language, I became more comfortable with my own Irishness in a sense, because it did feel sort of like I earned it in a sense. Not that necessarily anyone would have said I needed to, but just for myself, like I felt like, okay, no one can say that I can't say this. I'm confident in myself, and if someone says otherwise, that's their problem.
Big time. Big time. And I mean, what you have done, so few Irish people growing up and living in Ireland have succeeded in doing. You didn't have the language, or weren't exposed to the language as a language of the household or community. So that it is an extraordinary achievement. And also, I think your sensitivity to the kind of nuances is also extremely insightful, because as I say, it has got all of these kinds of, there are different kind of tropes and nuances in Ireland towards Irish, and being sensitive to that is I think you have a very, very deep insight indeed into how the language shows up here.
Yeah. And that is something too. I felt like, through the process, I already felt like I knew what I knew, and knew more than the average person who wouldn't have been living in Ireland. But I definitely felt like it filled in even more gaps and things too, which again kind of helped my personal sense of connection, because it also helped me with the sense of growing up of, there's this cool other place that I could have been from, but instead I was born here. Just grass is greener mentality. Like I've heard kind of the opposite from some of my younger some of my younger Irish family members about America. Like what do you have this in America and you have that in America. And, so it's just what you don't have, especially I think when you are younger and you only have a smaller kind of scope of the world and things. But that it really also helped me reconcile that too, where it made me realize like I don't think I would have come to the language in the way I did had I not been born in America, actually. And I think it gave me an awareness, and it removed, I had my own baggage, of course, from my sense of my ability or lack thereof to learn a language. And that definitely did complicate my experience in certain ways. But I didn't have some of the baggage that a lot of Irish people have, for example. And so, having this awareness that I was sort of almost in what I thought had always been like, I pulled the short straw. Like I ended up in the less cool place, or however you want to say it, as through my younger lens. It really made me respect and understand the importance of my entire experience. That I was able to look at things differently because of the background I had.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because as you say, so many people here who have come up through the education system are way down with this baggage of, oh my God, I spent 14 years learning this thing and I can't speak a word. And so and you didn't have that. But I think it's remarkable. So, we're recording this now in early 2026, and having started 2019, 2020, let's call it 2020. I think we're going to give you the credit, give you the benefit of that. Where you've come in that period of time is frankly remarkable, because I have been over in a learning process over broadly the same period, and even going back a bit further, since maybe about 2018, I probably started tentatively trying to learn, and so I'm just I know of what you've managed to do in that period, and I suppose this would be, I think, a good time to maybe let's dive into that. Because I know a lot of the people who listen to the show are very interested in learning, and they're probably, and I think the show is here. The reason I do this is because when I was back at that stage in 2018, I was really interested in the language, but I couldn't understand the language, couldn't listen to it as well, couldn't access it directly. But I was really voraciously hungry to know whatever I could about it. And anything that was available in English was phenomenal. So that's why we're here. And I think for you to give the benefit of your experience would be extraordinarily beneficial for anybody listening. So can we start there? And of course, for, spoiler alert, anybody listening, Briana teaches Irish, so you can contact her for her actual, direct assistance on this. And she's got amazing resources on Following Yours that we'll come to in a second, I hope. Let's start with how it worked for you, what you felt, what your process looked like, and then looking back at it now, what you felt was, good or bad, or might have done differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, like I said, I think this is true for the average person that hasn't learned a language before, but there are of course exceptions to every rule. But I think at least in the beginning, having some sort of structured course or something was really helpful to me. Again, even just in the sense that I didn't have to think about what I was learning next. It was just coming to me. And so with that, I just did, like I said, my best to study that and, try to retain everything week to week between my classes, to try to integrate what I would have changed and what I liked at the same time. I think one thing looking back was and I see this with other people now, that there is this sense of like, I need to know everything immediately. And I remember like desperately trying to memorize like the word for like wristwatch or something. It's like, what? I've probably still never said that, like I would recognize it. I could say it, but it's just this kind of losing the forest for the trees, so to speak, where people can get a little caught up in the details, myself included. And so in retrospect, that is one thing I would have trusted the process a little bit more. And that is sort of a recurring theme of something that I would have changed. And also I like to always make clear with the results I have had that was also because of a lot of really, really intense pressure I put on myself to really go for it. And again, like it did pay off in the sense that I got the results I got, and I got them relatively quickly. But I don't think that it's necessarily advisable to really go that hard all the time.
I hear you. I totally hear you. Because I have tended to kind of go down that route myself, and it works for me. But as I like that, I think for some people, I think that's maybe a little bit over the top and not necessary. And I completely think we can go a lot easier on ourselves.
Yes.
But like, let's start, for instance, with that little owl that you mentioned there, and because I know you have a post on Follow in your resources section on learning with Duolingo. Let's talk about him for a second. The little kind of passive aggressive owl, Ulvacon. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are obviously, it's a very divisive topic nowadays, I would say. And I will say I have heard that they are now using like AI voices instead of native Irish speakers and things like that. So obviously, just as a forenote, like that's not something I think is a good move on their part. But, you know, I do think the one undeniable thing that we all have to give it credit for, whatever we think about it, is that it does get people through the door. Like a lot of people start experimenting with that, and then that leads them to other things, myself included even. Because I think most people downloading the app, or at least after a couple of days of using it, don't necessarily think that's going to get them all the way, you know. And I think it makes them aware of the language and aware of what else is out there, and they want to find more. And I think that's an undeniable benefit of it, you know, no matter whatever other things there are to say about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because I think maybe in retrospect we can be a little bit kind of snooty about it, but it certainly was, because I also did, and I was completely, and it seems to be based on the science of addiction or something, because you're continually trying to, you know, you can't break the streak and all that stuff. And at the time, though, I did it all to the end, and I see you have your days that you've recorded on it and stuff like that, and I suppose you might say, okay, maybe we could have, you know, spent the time better, or there are better ways of doing it. But as you say, if it raises awareness or it makes connection, then that's something, and that's not nothing, and we shouldn't dismiss it. I mean, I liken it though, I think in retrospect to, like, if you want to learn tennis, I think you pick up a tennis racket and you go with a ball and you start kind of hitting stuff around. And I mean, I think Duolingo is like playing tennis on the Nintendo or something. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's not going to actually improve your tennis skills. But so I suppose, where would you recommend somebody to start now, based on your experience of looking back?
Yeah, I would say, you know, look for beginners classes. I know there are some, I haven't personally used these, but I know there are some like recorded things online. If you're not comfortable, that's another thing. I was terrified to take classes in person or even live. I know that is a thing for a lot of people, and I wouldn't say I'm scared now, obviously, but you know, that is something I think is important to mention, that it's going to be really uncomfortable. You know, it's going to be scary, and you're going to think, oh my God, I can't do this a few times, maybe more than a few times, but it is something that passes, and you know, you do have to just kind of push through that part. So yeah, I would say personally, I like the concept of taking classes or things, because it also does hold you accountable for however many weeks. Like I was saying for myself, you know, that if someone does want to try to go their own, unlike me, who was just Googling things randomly, I would recommend the like Gaeilge book series, which, you know, a lot of classes I've had have actually pulled resources from those even. So yeah, those are kind of two routes, but I prefer the kind of live interaction side of things.
Yeah, I mean, no, I completely agree with you. And Gaeilge Ganstro is an incredible resource, actually. I too spent a long time listening to those role plays on Gaeilge Ganstro, and I'm reminded of the voices of the characters who I became intimate familiar with. But and yeah, so the lessons. I'm just curious. You mentioned the Irish Centre in New York, because we had Caoimhe Ní Loingsigh, yes, from there. Did you encounter her when you were learning there?
Yes, so she was my teacher.
Cool.
From the start, and then eventually moved on to doing private lessons with her for several years thereafter. So yeah. Oh, so
Caoimhe is extremely cool. And if you are interested, you want to go back and check season 1, episode 18. We spoke to Caoimhe here back in the day. So that's just so cool to be completing the circle and making the connection here now. It is.
It is the thing with Irish.
Irish is smaller. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller all the time, the deeper you go into it. So lessons, I love that, and getting that kind of, you know, having that kind of accountability and commitment to showing up kind of on a regular basis. And of course, there are so many incredible resources, you know, available online to do that, and of course you have in person as well, which is great depending on where you're located. But how did that then evolve for you? Because I think, you actually came. Did you spend time living in the Gaeltacht at some point?
I mean, I've spent weeks, not not like serious committed time, but yeah, I spent a week doing a course at Gaeilge in Donegal, in Donegal, and then I've visited Gaeilge talks several times since then, just for a few days here and there. But I haven't like truly lived in one, I would say. Um, but yeah, no, I would say, yeah, again, I think similar to what you were saying, having this sort of veracity to know everything I could. One thing that maybe isn't for everyone, like you were saying, that I do think really helped me in a lot of ways was just this sort of deep desire to use the language as the language from very early on. And again, talk about uncomfortable. Like I was, everything went on Zoom and people were having Kirkakora and things like that online. And I was like, oh, I have to attend. Whereas I can introduce myself and maybe that was about it. And even that was probably scary. I definitely threw myself in the deep end in quite a few ways because I just had this real desire to actually use what I was learning. And one really big way that I found I would still, I mean, I think there's no problem with doing any of those things, but I think the strongest of all of those is reading, in my opinion, which isn't something I think a lot of people think to do very early on in a language, because we think we're expecting reading to be like it is for us in our first language, English for most of us, that, you know, I'm going to sit down and read a book and like whatever. For me, it wasn't, especially in the beginning, it wasn't really about the story at all. Almost, it was collecting words, so to speak. You know, it was just, okay, this is a source of a lot of information that I can just pull these words out, and the more words I know, the more I'll understand. And so I really, from an early point, was trying to read. Again, very different experience than what one might think of as reading in our typical sense. But I do think it really helped me grow my vocabulary quite a bit, which I was also taking those words and making flashcards and, again, trying to use them because I was interested in using them because I had learned this. It was something I was like, oh, I learned this word. I want to use this word now. And so I think also in regards to the fear of getting out there and speaking of things, I think when you do have this excitement, when it is exciting to you, it helps with that fear quite a bit, that you want to put yourself out there because you feel confident in what you've learned, even if it's not much. So,
and
yeah.
the people, and I think my experience certainly has been almost universally. I can't think of a negative example. You know, any of you countries is going to be so supportive and encouraging, and you know, kind. I suppose basically would be the ethos that I would associate with the Irish language community. Always. And I think that's in total contrast because a lot of Irish people would have a big kind of negative school correction. It was not maybe the most kind and supportive environment anybody might ever have been in. But certainly the Irish language learning kind of community is quite the opposite. Interesting you mentioned about reading because on our first episode here in season 2, we spoke with Joe Fartha and Patricia Nick Owen of Listen Up Irish, and they have a whole process around learning through reading, and I think it's genius, and I think it's so neglected. Because I mean, we'll come to opportunities for speaking in a minute because I'm very, very interested to know what it looks like for you now. But I think like one of the difficulties I have, I live in an English speaking part of Ireland, and I don't have regular opportunities to interact with people as Gaeilge naturally in my day-to-day kind of interactions. But you can pick up, read in the language, on your phone. You've got tourist.ie, you've got Scale in the Irish Times on a Tuesday, you've got Shopton in the Irish Independent, and you've also then got books as well to pick up and learn it. And as you say, like it can feel a little weird, but I always think back actually to when I was a kid growing up, and I was really lazy then too, and I would always want to take the shortcut and I'd never look up words in a dictionary, because I thought that was just too boring to go and do that. So I would basically try and figure out the context of everything that I was reading. I would figure out what the word meant from what. That must be something like, I don't know, whatever. I get the idea, right? And then you would have this kind of notion of what a word was for what. And I was quite cool with that as a kid in English. Yeah. And you're learning off the cereal boxes and off the back of the milk cartons, and it's any opportunity you have to kind of and you're learning continuously by doing that, and you're quite certainly I was very, very comfortable with that level of kind of, okay, this isn't perfect, but hey, it's working for me. And I think as adult learners, then we get so much more kind of hung up about that. And we everything has to be kind of, we understand it 100%, and it all has to be correct before we can move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think too, it's interesting you said that, because I'd say that's also, in the beginning, you will probably need to look up words just to even get the gist of things. There's sort of two ways to go about it. You can literally look up every word you don't know, or like you said, you can look up enough to feel like, okay, like I got what I need to get out of it. And again, I think at a very beginner point, like you have to remind yourself that what you're getting out of it is the language. You're not necessarily getting the story or the literature of it. Like your goals for it are different, And I would say as you progress, it does become more like what you said. Like even for me now, and I think even true in English to some extent, a little bit less common in English, there will be words that I would have never had any reason to have ever encountered before. But again, from context and things, at this point, it would be one word every page or something like that. So, that scope does change as you go. And I think through experience, you get more comfortable with it. But yeah, like you said, I think in many ways we lose a sort of comfort for curiosity instead of I should have known this,
Yeah, and we're kind of giving ourselves that negative feedback in our head. I've often heard that, I think if we spoke to other people the way we speak to ourselves, we'd probably get arrested. But I this brings me, I think, perfectly to, or also I should say, to something that that really resonated with me from your profile and bio, and it is this idea of embracing imperfection. Mm-hmm. And I know you've written about this. I've seen some of your posts on this, and but I think this is a really key fundamental point, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that was part of why, in some ways I always like my story is my story, but I also, think there were unhealthy aspects to it for sure. Again, like I did get results quickly. I did enjoy the process. I don't want to say I didn't, but there was definitely this anxiety around it that I needed to know more, that I needed to be better, that I needed to do things right. And even it was interesting that I would have sort of thought that as I got into a more advanced level, that I would be one of those people, and this is no disrespect to anyone, who would for the rest of my life be like obsessing over grammar, looking up these little intricacies. But instead what sort of happened was, and again, that's great if you have the patience for that, but instead I sort of got to a point where I was using the language, and it didn't feel so important anymore to obsess over it. And again, that's not to say I don't care how if I'm saying something wrong, but it was sort of just this understanding that what I had worked to get out of it, I got out of it. And I didn't need to keep being hard on myself about it. I'm going to continue to improve, and I'm going to continue to learn things, but I don't need to keep like drilling down and digging deeper.
Yeah, or waiting to start. Well, that kind of thing, as if when I get kind of to a certain level of proficiency, then I'll start. Because it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and that's a thought I had. I remember thinking when I started, it's really funny in retrospect, but when I started back in 2019, my thought was, oh yeah, I'll like basically learn this to fluency and then start to speak to people. And like the opposite was very true in my later experience. But
yeah. But so something else, and again, I want to come back because I have a particular kind of destination I wanted to get with this piece of the conversation. But before I do that, because I do want to pick up on, because that embracing perfection really resonated with me. But something else, and I think this goes a lot deeper than language learning, to be honest with you. And I'd love you just to speak to us about this for a little bit, because it's something that you have put out there, is finding peace on the other side of fear. I mean, that's very, very interesting. Could you talk to us about that, please?
Yeah, of course. I know that maybe the way I come off, especially in Irish or with Irish, is someone who is confident in doing what I'm doing. And, it's always hard to kind of believe people when they say something that seems to contradict what you're experiencing. But my whole life, I struggled with insecurity about everything. And even my own experience with the school system in America was one that made me feel like I wasn't as smart as other people or things like that for various reasons. And so I did sort of come out with this like, oh, I didn't learn Spanish in however many years. Well, I'm never going to learn a language, or I can't do this. I'm never going to do this. And so the confidence I have now in myself and in the language very much came from disproving that. And like I said, I did definitely put a lot of pressure on myself to disprove that over time, but I can't complain with the way it worked out, because I did really find that. And I think it was learning that a few things. It was the sense of, oh yeah, I did it. Like after you get through something scary, it's almost like an adrenaline rush. Like I remember literally feeling like physically sick to go to my first Irish lesson, which is funny. Like, what do you think is going to happen to me there? You know,
Yeah.
But I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And then you realize, okay, so like maybe not so as everyone else, but I'm not in a room with like native speakers and I'm a beginner. You know, in most cases that wouldn't happen. And you realize, like you were saying, everyone is nice and everyone is dealing with what you're dealing with. And I think the other reason I really like group lessons is you hear other people not know things. You hear other people ask questions that maybe you were afraid to ask. And I think it can really help you feel less alone in the process. And there are times too, when I don't mean this to put anyone down, but it builds your confidence to be like, oh, I knew that. I knew that answer, and someone else maybe didn't. But again, the opposite happens, but then you don't feel on the spot that you didn't know the answer. Okay, I still got the information, you know?
Yeah, and it's like it's not this homogenous kind of thing, and that is so cool because I find particularly that idea around imperfection and correction, because there's one stage in the journey where I would have been very much always, as you say, afraid to say it or you know, because I don't want to utter a kind of a something that's clearly incorrect, and I know I haven't got it right yet. But what I find now is I just blurt it out. And then I will, as I'm thinking, no, that wasn't right. And well, how should I have done that? And that process itself is that kind of self-correction without kind of getting down on yourself, but just realizing, oh yeah, that's that thing again. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know what that means.
And I think another part of that too is, you know, taking the pressure off of that. My good friend, Briana Ní Loingsigh, who wrote the book Gaeilge, there's a story that's in the book that I experienced with her firsthand. That, and again, this is not in any way to put someone down, but someone made a funny mistake, you know, and we were all, including the person who made the mistake, we're laughing about it. And obviously they're never going to forget that ever again. And that this, because what they said was, Molly said, oh, I'm tired to my Taoiseach or something like that. And someone tried to say, to cuma ort, like you look like you are. But she said, it's cumalum, which means I don't care. Yes. And so we were all laughing at it. And it's again, this like, taking mistakes and like removing the power from them in a sense.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, again, there were people in that call who probably didn't know either of those phrases, who then learned them from this exchange. Again, like I said, you'll never forget something when you have a story behind it. And we were all laughing at it. Like we got something out of it that was almost more than if it had been said perfectly. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, is that it's still life in a sense.
Completely. And these are human interactions and human kinds of, we're trying to express things that didn't come out in language form to begin with. And then we're having to kind of put them into a language, and then it's a question of what are we using and then are we translating them into another language as we do that, and so on. It's incredible, actually. But Briana, can you tell us, what does it look like? You know, you've achieved an extraordinary level of proficiency in the language now, and you work you write in the language on your Substack, and you teach and help people to learn. But what does the language look like in your life now? How does it kind of show up for you? And how do you use it on a day-to-day basis? Would you mind telling us what that looks like for you?
Yes, so that's an interesting thing. Again, kind of going back to my shift in mentality around it, in a sense, is that I almost feel like I couldn't stop using it if I wanted to at this point, which is a great thing. I love that, you know, especially the fact that I am in America of all places. And I think that's another thing I want to dispel quickly is, you know, people think, oh, I have to be in the Gaeltacht, or I have to be in Ireland, or I have to be what I've met people that have been in even more maybe difficult to learn places than I have, because I will say New York has a massive benefit that there is a really big Irish language community here, like, as we already discovered, mutual friend between us. That, you know, so here in New York, there are a lot of like pop-up Gaeltachs. There's a group called Gaeltacht NYC. There's also one Conran na Gaeilge Brooklyn. And, you know, there's several different like cultural centers and things that will do different events and things like that through Irish. But even more just through those things and through the process of talking to people, even online, like I've developed friendships in the language. And I would say now, like my closest friendship like is through Irish. And again, that's a really, I think, a good thing for both of us in the sense that she's someone who's from Ireland and would have learned it in school and all of that. But it's not, we're speaking in Irish because we want to be speaking in Irish. It's just the way it is. And I think that's a really nice experience to have in anything that you're learning, just for it to just be a natural part of your life. Obviously, it takes years of intentionally choosing it to be there to get to that point. But yeah, so I would say that's the social piece of it. And then, like you said, I do quite a bit of work, using the language now, which was by design. That was a choice, and it was a scary choice at times because, I left sort of stability to take on seeing what I could, again, kind of mirroring my experience with Irish, seeing what I could do if I threw myself into trying new things and seeing what I could do in this world, and really with the mentality of wanting to help people, on the same journey that I've been. And I have even more things in mind I want to try in the future.
Would you mind just telling us a little bit about that? Because I think people listening would be very interested to learn about what does that look like for you? How does it work? Because I know in Fáileamór you have resources and how to learn kind of tab and Irish learning support group. Tell us please what that all looks like and how people can interact with that.
Yeah, I started thinking of all of this, sort of, I was in a very kind of stable job for many years, for over 10 years. And it was something that in recent years, it was sort of on my mind. I would want to maybe do something else, but I didn't really want to just go to another company or something like that. I really wanted to see like what I could do. And again, knowing people that were doing things like that, both in the language and not, I think that is one thing I think sometimes we need to see people doing things to believe that we can do them. And again, my friend Molly, who has had great success with YouTube and a book and social media and things like that, she really wanted to pursue expanding that. And again, like something that we both very much have in common, and something I very much, and I think you'll relate to this too, I very much had to grapple with when I was starting to put myself out there online, was I had this sort of like concern of doing so almost, where I didn't like the idea of putting myself out there. I didn't like the idea of like it being about me or something. It really was like, I think I know things that can help other people, but I had to really kind of grapple with the selflessness in that, in a sense, because especially in the time we live in now, people think of social media and Substack and podcasts and things and they go, well, the person just wants to hear themselves talk or things like that.
Oh yeah. That mentality, but who's this guy?
Yeah. And it's something, I think, again, like we deal with more internally often than externally. And so again, knowing someone very closely who I was seeing so clearly that the intent was not ego. The intent was very much, what can I do for this language and for people who want to connect with this language, really helped me, start to put myself out there slowly. So, I started with Substack and then sort of have been the whole time kind of balancing posts that just share my experience because that's in me to share. Like I've always loved writing. I've always loved expressing myself in that way. And as you touched on earlier, it was always my mind to do so bilingually because it felt like if I'm going to be talking about this experience, like I need to show that experience in a sense. And that was scary too, even though I was definitely at a point where, I could write a whole article. It was still scary to put it out there and think, is someone going to come and correct me or say everything?
I mean, that bravo and mahu, because that is really walking the walk right there, putting it up online.
And again, like I have gotten, knock on wood, I've gotten no like criticisms or negative comments. Honestly, I don't even, and maybe I should sometimes get even just corrective feedback in some cases. But again, I think people understand that there are times when people are asking for correction or seem to need correction. Like you said, someone's like, oh, what is this? But if someone is using what they're using, in most experiences I've had, people just want to support you in getting the words out that you have. And they're not going to just come in and say, oh, you said that all wrong, because you said something. And they understood you in most cases, whether or not it was perfect. And I think that's also why it became important to me to put it out there, even though I'm sure I'm still making mistakes, and I'm sure there's still things that could be improved upon.
For sure. I mean, But that's just so cool. It's so inspirational, I think. And thank you for sharing this with everybody here, because I know people listening who are learning and who are at various different stages in their learning process will really be inspired by your experience and how you've managed to overcome the challenges you've faced in learning. I love that thing you mentioned there about developing, friendships, new friendships, as Gaeilge, and where it's kind of the language. It wasn't this friendship was created with a view to let's learn the language together. In order to create the relationship, you had to speak to each other as Gaeilge. I mean, that's just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, no, it was really cool too, because again, not to keep bringing her up, so to speak, but it was my friend Molly. She had a group online that was a conversation group. She still has it, and so I would attend because I wanted to use my Irish. I wanted to practice. And then she had certain ties to New York and ended up finding herself here a few times, and we'd hang out, and that was cool. And then she ended up moving here, and we became very important in each other's lives. And then, like you were saying, that led into me having opportunities and things to teach and things. And that was also a whole difficult thing for me too, in the sense that I was thinking, do I know enough to do this? And very much what I came to understand through doing it and having someone who trusts you to do something, who isn't going to let you do something that they don't think you can do. It was realizing that my role maybe isn't to correct everyone's grammar or to give them the right word in every scenario, but like you were saying, to be an example in a sense, and to be relatable, and to say, no, like literally, I know what you feel right now. Like, I know you knew that word 5 minutes ago. I've been there. Like, it's not your fault. And so my real hope because how it works usually is that I'm sort of supporting, her deeper teaching, and I'm with people in breakout rooms or things like that. And I really want to create an environment that helps people not, and this isn't to say I didn't have good teachers or things, but I had such a struggle with pushing myself and feeling like I didn't know enough and feeling like I needed to be perfect and feeling like I was never going to be able to do it. Did I really want to help other people avoid that as much as possible? Or at the very least, make them know that if they feel like that, they're not the only person feeling like that. I've heard a lot of learners say that, but again, it's one of those things. There's so many things like this in life that we all deal with, but none of us talk about it. And then when someone does, we're all like, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a service to people when you can just kind of, put a name on something like that and identify with another people go, oh yeah, me too. And why did nobody ever say that before? It's fantastic. It's just extraordinary. Would you mind just a couple of things? I mean, I'm tempted. We're just right up against time. I could get into Polish here and talk. We could because I'm really fascinated by your journey there, and perhaps maybe that's something we may come back to. But because before that, I want to just, in terms of people who are here learning Irish, what are the things that you know now that you wished you know at the beginning? What are the things that looking back, you're kind of going, I wish I'd known that sooner, or anything like that?
Yeah, again, I guess, biggest one overall is just a mentality shift of it's going to come together if you just keep doing it, you're going to do it. If you just keep going the path, you'll get to the destination. And the other side of that too is also knowing that you do have to walk that path. And that is something I'm aware of too, is sometimes when we feel insecure about our ability to do something, we pull away. And so I think there is a balance to be struck of keep going, but you don't have to run. You should walk, and keep moving, but
It can be one step at a time, and that's enough.
Yeah.
What is the biggest challenge you feel you faced trying to learn?
Again, just myself in a lot of ways, just really getting in my own way in the sense of being hard on myself. And I think at times, and I think this is something a lot of people also fall victim to, I think I almost would spend more time trying to calculate when I would be at a certain point, or when I would be able to do this, or when I would be able to do that, or trying to think of things in a very future sense. I spent more time thinking about that and obsessing over that and what I could and couldn't do than I was actually learning at times. And it still feels almost productive because, it's to do with the language. But, I think it really is. I think the antidote to that is just finding enjoyment in what you're doing, whatever level that is. Like, just enjoy what you're doing.
Being in the moment and doing it right now, just right here, right now. That's all we can do. What is the most rewarding aspect of the language now that you've gotten to the stage that you're at with it for you?
Yeah, I think just the feeling for me of using it, and it is easy, like anything in life, to sort of take things for granted or forget, where you came from in a sense. And it is true. Like, it's almost hard for me to imagine that there was a time I couldn't speak the language. But I think that also just shows how integral in my life it is now. And when I do speak it is a reminder of my ability to do things I didn't think I could, and I think that's really, and that's why I like to, when I write about the language, I like to make it more just a lens for life, because while I did learn a skill, it very much changed how I saw myself and saw a lot of things. Obviously, like, I made some pretty big changes in my life, like I was saying, like changing my job up and things like that. And, that had a direct connection to the language. But I think I wouldn't have gone on to do anything differently had I not known that I could do things I didn't once think I could. I think whether it was going to be in the language or whether it was going to be in some other industry or something else, like, I needed that lesson in my life of seeing, like, this is something I really, truly didn't think was possible. And I was able to do it. And I think that also gave me the perspective, like what I was saying about one step at a time, is if you put in the time, you will get the results, and time is relative. I put in more time in a shorter span than some people, but it will add up. It's cumulative.
I'm literally in awe listening, Briana, because I think that whole piece you mentioned about, looking at life through the lens of language. I mean, it's so many, and the way you think about, as an individual, how you change, the mindset, all of those things, that they're all such just inherent human traits that we all face up against.
Yes, absolutely. And even deeper too, like, I've had so many experiences I wouldn't have had without the language.
Yeah.
It's also sort of given value, I would say, to experiences in a way that I think they should have value, regardless of what language you're speaking. But again, in the world that we have now, where it's so easy to be connected and so easy to talk to people, to talk to someone doesn't feel impressive, But speaking in Irish to someone, especially if it's something you don't get to do often or have never really done before, well, that's a deep, a meaningful conversation just in the sense that you're having it. And so I think it really helps you reconnect with people in a sense. And I think the unique thing about Irish compared to other languages is that even if you're talking to someone who is totally fluent and has been speaking it for their whole life even, they're probably still having some of that same feeling because they're not able to just talk to everyone in Irish, and I think that sort of does create a really special, I think people are pay more attention to each other in Irish in a sense, and we're able to really connect with each other because we know that we're doing something special. It's not just basic communication, just to say what we have to say. So it's sort of made almost mundane experiences memorable.
Fascinating. I mentioned Polish briefly because, of course, the Polish side of your heritage is a huge piece, and I've seen you write about that. But you're actually now you've started learning since 2023, learning Polish. I mean, how's that going? And how does the Irish language learning process feed into your now learning Polish?
Yeah, again, I would say, the huge mentality shift is that I've been a lot gentler with myself with Polish. And even I did start in 2023, but I've thought about it recently. Like, it's hard to tell exactly how much I've learned in a sense, like time-wise, because there were times when I had to take breaks for various reasons. And even if the same things had occurred when I was learning Irish, I wouldn't have allowed myself to almost. Like, I would have forced my way through it and been doing flashcards when everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
And so again, I think there's sort of a piece for me in knowing, like, I will learn it. Like, I don't doubt that. I will get to the level I want to be. Just, it's going to just take how long it's going to take.
Take its time. Yeah.
Whereas with Irish, it wasn't so much impatience as it was a lack of trust or belief that it could happen, And I think that's something too with a lot of learners is people feel like like, oh, like I want to be fluent tomorrow. But I think it's more coming from doubt that I'm ever going to be fluent, that you need proof that you're doing it or that you're capable of doing it more than it is the need for instant gratification. So that is definitely one thing that's been different in that regard, that I have just more confidence in my ability to learn a language. Yeah. So that's probably the biggest thing I've taken from that.
Amazing. And it's such a, it feels like just this expanding kind of circle that you're in now, because as monoglot English speakers, we can very easily get away without learning anything language wise, and it's only when you start to learn that you realize how much you've been missing in terms of what else is going on out there.
And something that's been interesting too, adding another language to the mix, is realizing the ways in which English is the outlier. Like there are certain things that people will say, oh, that's really weird that this language does this or this language does that. And then when you start to look at a couple other languages, you're like, no, most languages seem to do that thing that you were saying is weird. Like we're the weird ones for not doing it,
Yeah. Cool. So cool. Briana, Cara, I just want to ask, to wrap it up, a question that I ask every guest here is, you've been spending, this is 6 years now 6 years and counting in learning this language. You've become fluent in the language. You're living your life through the language. You're teaching the language. You're helping others to learn the language. You're providing inspirational example for others to do so. Why do you do all that? What's your Irish language why? What motivates you to do what you do in relation to the language?
I think just seeing all that I've gotten out of it, and all that it has to give, and it's like any sort of love. You want to support the thing that you love as much as it supports you.
Oh, amazing. Briana, Cara, buenas ansult as an scéal a Ryan Tulin, Gurv Mahagut Fui Shin, August Berbua, August Banat.
Gurmion Ligas Haim.
Thanks for listening. Gurv Mila Mahagut Asave Eishtut. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests and to receive exclusive content. Slán